Welcome to Fresh Air Metaphors. My name is Elizabeth. This is a podcast, a show. It comes from a place of curiosity. I need some good conversation, and maybe you do too. So stay tuned for that. A little bit about myself before we get into the show. It's nice to meet you. Like I said, I'm Elizabeth. I don't really define myself by the things that I do for a living so much, but I will give you a little bit about my CV. So I currently work in a website company. Prior to that, I was an entrepreneur in the yoga industry and taught spiritual classes, ran moon circles, things of that nature. I've worked retail. I grew up in a chocolate store. I've been a travel agent, a door-to-door salesperson. I've fused glass. I've made jewelry. I've done a lot of different jobs, which is why I don't really identify myself with that job. As far as education, I have a 4-year BA in English, a specialization in English with an interest in philosophy, minor in philosophy. And I feel like that will be the flavor of this show. Those points that I've just touched on, where the metaphysical and the physical meet, where the spiritual and the intellectual, the logical and the imaginative, just forging new pathways, making new connections. And as I've said, I really wanted to come to this project with a feeling of ease and with the sheer intention of connecting with other human beings on an intellectual level, of having conversation, of having connection in a way that feels authentic to me. So I wanted to start every show with the reading of a poem, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term bibliomancy. If you're not, it's where you take a book and you run your fingers along the sides and you just sort of play with the book and get into the energy of the book. You can close your eyes and then you just open to a page, and wherever your eyes land first, that's the paragraph or the section for you. For the poem, I landed on E. Cummings' poem, Somewhere I Have Never Traveled, Gladly Beyond. And this is in the Norton Anthology of Poetry, shorter 5th edition. I collect poetry anthologies, so I have plenty of resources to read a different poem every time, although it would be crazy if the same poem came up more than once. Um, so let's see if this keeps going, and maybe that will happen. So I'll read to you this poem, Somewhere I Have Never Traveled, Gladly Beyond. Any experience, your eyes have their silence. In your most frail gesture are things which enclose me, or which I cannot touch because they are too near. Your slightest look easily will unclose me, though I have closed myself as fingers. You open always, petal by petal myself as spring opens, touching skillfully, mysteriously, her first rose. Or if your wish be to close me, and I and my life will shut very beautifully, suddenly, as when the heart of this flower imagines the snow carefully everywhere descending. Nothing which we are to perceive in this world equals the power of your intense fragility, whose texture compels me with the color of its countries, rendering death and forever with each breathing. I do not know what it is about you that closes and opens, only something in me understands the voice of your eyes is deeper than all roses. Nobody, not even the rain, has such small hands. So that is Somewhere I Have Never Traveled, Gladly Beyond by E. E. Cummings. Let me know what you thought of that poem. It brings to mind a few things that I've been considering recently regarding fragility, femininity, mental health, and relationship. So it's interesting that this is the poem that came up, and it almost reminds me of trauma, like that feeling of opening and closing, where you open up to trust and you open up to love, and you're this fragile, beautiful, vulnerable thing. And then something happens that reminds you of something that you've had to survive before, or you've had to fight before or overcome before, and the feeling of closing is a protective mechanism. Or even when you think of a flower in the dark that closes, it's closing off to the night, it's closing off to the dark, and it opens to the sun. And then there are some who only open. And it's almost as if this is true through trauma as well, that some only open to the night and only open to the dark. Like you become vulnerable and beautiful and fragile to the very people who will take advantage of that. But then to the people who wish you well, who are well meaning, you're closed. And it makes me wonder what that's for. And I don't really have a plan for this first effort. I just wanted to sit down and record and see what came up. That's definitely something I've been thinking about a lot. Relationships, how it feels to see yourself in a way that is so intensely annoying and unyielding almost. I think in romantic relationships it can be unyielding. If you hear a sound, it's because I'm sitting on an exercise ball. I sit on it all day to try and stabilize my core, to work on my posture. What are your healthy traps? Maybe I'll do an episode on healthy traps. It's like a little philosophy I developed for myself, where you know your weaknesses and so you kind of work within them. So for instance, I'm really good for, if I've made plans with someone, I will be accountable to them more than I will be to myself. So find ways to make myself accountable. Or I can't think of another one right now. But there's all these little different little healthy traps you can set for yourself, where you just know, oh, I'm powerless to make excuses or defeat this. And so I'll do this thing that's good for me, even though normally I would avoid it. Tell me if that makes sense to you. So this is about it. I just wanted to see how this would go. 10 minutes. Tell me if you liked it. And I'm gonna go. Have a good night.